Welcome back to Anime Lockdown. This is the 2008 Anime Bubble panel with Sam from Anime Herald. Welcome back to Anime Lockdown.
Thank you so much for having me. And excuse me. And hello, Anime Lockdown for our second year. Welcome to that 2000. Wow, that's going well. That 2008 feeling, exploring the era of the 2000s anime bubble. As JP just wonderfully mentioned, I am Samantha Ferreira, editor-in-chief of Anime Herald, and I have a bit of an affection for this time period. And before I begin, though, I do want to say that this is nowhere near an exhaustive discussion. A person could literally write a book on this topic and still not catch everything. That's me. I'm writing a book. However, the panel does intend to deliver the broad strokes of the topic and a basic timeline of the events that led up to and through the 2008 anime crash. I retrieve my quotes from a variety of sources, including articles, documentaries, and interviews I've done during the research process for my book. And I will source these and mention where I got them from as they come up wherever possible. And for the people I did speak with over the past 3 years, I want to just extend a genuine thanks to all of you, because I wouldn't be here without any of you. All right, with that in mind, let's begin. So what is the anime bubble? I mean, honestly, this was about a decade-long period that ran from roughly late 97, early 1998 through about 2007, with a firm end being in 2008, coinciding with the Great Recession. This is a period that was signified within the anime world by an explosive growth in the overall anime community, as well as an overall growth in the anime industry. It was a major push from moving anime from the subculture to general pop culture. And there were several industry milestones that really fueled this growth that we will go into today, that ultimately led to an overheating of the market and a general collapse of the entire industry, that the after effects are still being felt to this day. But before we get to that, we have to talk about early American anime fandom. And anime fandom as we know it roughly began in 1976. According to Fred Patton, the airing of Brave Riding on Japanese community networks was basically that first push towards what we had for anime fandom. And this was because it marked the airing of Brave Riding, which was brought about by the Markai Trading Company, coincided with the launch of the VCR in consumer spaces. And I mean, this was a happy coincidence that led to the ability to not only just watch shows and enjoy them, but to be able to preserve and show them to other people. So instead of saying, hey, you have to tune in at this time on this channel that you may or may not get, you could tape it and show the tape to your friends, family, or just a random group of people that came to watch anime. And ultimately, this led to the foundation of the CFO, the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, which was founded by a group of Los Angeles fans, notably Fred Patton, Judy Niver, Wendell Washer, Mark Merlino, and a lot of other people came from the organization, which was officially founded in fall 1976. However, they started having unofficial meetings in roughly May of that year. And as that was getting started, we started to see a trend of more clubs in other communities start to pop up. You had the Star Blazers fan club launch in 1980 in New York, for example. And these were more regional, but they allowed for a lot of the overall fandom to just grow and coalesce for the first time in history. And this was, to quote Tim Eldred on this, there were VCRs by the end of the 70s, but you still had to be able to catch a broadcast of something to get it on tape. And that was still extremely rare, especially in the mid-1970s, as you know. That technology was really out of reach of just about everybody. And so the next best thing was to get together with your friends into a club collect wherever you could, and commit to paper. Make your own memory albums, share it with whoever was interested in what drove you. And honestly, this all came to a flashpoint in 1979 with the introduction of Starblaze, which was seen as the first major launch point for what we commonly associate with anime fandom today. And we're going to jump ahead a bit because in 1987, college student Anne Schubert created the anime-centric Usenet group Rec de Arts de Anime. Now, this could have been one of several things, but they went with the name anime because the term Rec de Arts de Japanimation was kind of tainted. I mean, it was the 1980s, and people were putting a lot of emphasis on that first syllable. And Rec de Arts de Animation was too long to type. So they just settled on Rec de Arts de Anime as the overall term that they want to use. And funnily enough, the first major discussions on the board focused on Robotech, which was still white hot at the time as it was actively on syndication, and Star Blazers. And I mean, this proved to be nothing short of a revelation because it brought fans together in a way that pen pal layers couldn't, that club meetings couldn't, that random get-togethers couldn't, because it was something that was instantaneous, nationwide, and generally accessible to anyone that had access to Usenet. So you didn't have to have the issue of knowing a guy to know a guy to get into your local anime club anymore. And that happened for better or for worse, because as Dave Merrill famously said, in the old days, fandom was a leper colony of dweebs, misfits, rejects, and failures. People who had formed a deep and unhealthy relationship with fantasy and or science fiction somewhere during their third or fourth beating, courtesy of that jerk in the 6th grade. Fantasy A's were seeking shelter from the storm, looking for secret redoubts where they could commiserate with fellow rejects, dream of a better world, and argue about Kirk versus Picard. And I mean, it really showed in the Usenet spaces, especially where they had a fairly pronounced casual misogyny problem, unfortunately, despite being founded by a woman. However, as the community grew and tech became more available, notably with the introduction of the Amiga and Video Toaster, fans began to subtitle and distribute their own anime products. Before that, what they would do was they would actually just translate the work. Someone would translate the works, pass out scripts at the club meeting, and either narrate or basically recite the dialogue as the video was playing, outside of the rare subtitle stuff they caught off of TV. And a lot of these distro groups were volunteer basic. Their products were made via word of mouth, or like Usenet, or some form of distribution list. Typically, to receive a tape, you would send a guy $5. He would hopefully, if you could trust them, send you back a tape full of anime a couple weeks later. And this had grown into a community of its own, with its own code of honor and a lot of drama. I mean, as you can see in that top screenshot there, we know what Miami Mike did at Dragon Con, especially thanks to Dawn, who I think is in the audience. Hi, Dawn. Anyway, as fan subgroups competed, quality and speed began to improve, and all the while tensions began to flare behind the scenes. To quote Justin Savakis, early fan subs were very bare bones affairs, loosely timed and rough in appearance. Not a whole lot of thought was put into credit or presentation in the early days. Fans were just trying to make anime watchable for people who didn't speak Japanese. He added that fansubber mailing lists turned into toxic stews of flame wars, overinflated egos, and pointless competition, both direct and indirect. And he noted that some groups, mine included, put elaborate animated logos at the beginning of their fan subs and implemented their own improvements to the works, from custom credits to enhanced audio tracks to something that they had as signature. However, not every fan server did operate a distribution group. Todd Perkins of Central Anime, for example, explained that he would basically just bring his stuff down to convention, and if there was a group they were meeting with, they would just trade tapes there. And from there, his tapes, which included most notably Legends of Galactic Heroes, would just disseminate through the community that way. And it was through these efforts, through a lot of the fan efforts, as well as the growing interest in the commercial realm, that the industry that we knew, began to form. For example, the first issue of Protoculture Addicts launched in 1987. Anamego made its debut with Maddox 01 in 1988. And fun fact, Robert Woodhead was actually doing hourly showings of that at Worldcon when they were marketing the show. Basically from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. on Friday and Saturday of the event at the Boston Park Plaza, which would later go on to host Anime Boston. Anyway, tangent aside, Central Park Media was founded in 1990. AnimeCon was later Anime Expo was held at San Jose's Red Lion Inn. 80 Vision opened up in 1992 with Devil Hunter Yoko. And about that, Toho Shozo Watanabe actually commented on the Devil Hunter Yoko license a while back. He said, "We were a little bit concerned about Ledford's ability to distribute the film, but we couldn't find another distributor." And ultimately, Ledford spent about $100,000 for the license costs, the cost of subbing, and producing 8,000 copies. According to Forbes magazine, he made his money back within 90 days. So it was clear they had something there. It was also in this year that we saw the first issue of Animerica. Pioneer LDC, who had previously done a lot of Laserdisc releases of like symphonies and things like that, released its first anime title with Tenchi Muyo. Otakon launched 2 years later. Funimation opened their doors in 94. And it was from here that we started to see that real cut industry start to take form and build into something that was vastly different than what fans had encountered in the 70s and 80s. And it's all really began to build because in 1996, we saw that little game, something no one's probably played before, Pokemon. I think that's it, Pocket Monsters, launched in Japan in red and green versions. In Japan, they were an instant phenomenon, selling about 4.7 million units. And by 1998, the series was valued at $4 billion alone. And Nintendo was actually working really hard to build a similar success in North America. And they really went above and beyond. Daniel Dockery, who wrote the book Monster Kids, actually commented this with me, saying, "I think people sometimes forget just how saturated we are with commercials in Pokemon's lead up. It was everywhere. Nintendo for Kids, using a lot of Nintendo of America's advertising dollars, along with their own, really put it everywhere." And the biggest driver of this came from the anime series. Because in September 1998, a preview for the Pokemon anime aired on syndicated networks across the US, Battleboard and St. Anne. The series proper began airing a day later. And this was actually the widest distribution of a mainstream anime product since the days of Robotech and Voltron. The games themselves launched just 3 weeks later on September 28th, which laid the groundwork for the next wave of anime fandom. Excuse me. To quote Chad Kine, "One of the biggest surprises in Pioneer sales history was Pokemon. We knew it would be big, but we thought maybe 20, 30,000 units would be reasonable and decent, and our break-even was much lower than that. And then the first unit went out the door at 100,000 units. Then we're like, yeah! And then this first month it was up to 1 million units. It was insane. We wound up doing 8 to 10 million units of the first 12 volumes we released." And this was reflected in the fandom at the time. Jennifer Collins, a fan that I talked with a few years ago, stated, "There weren't many of the people I knew who were watching anime or really knew what it was prior to at least prior to Pokemon coming out. And then when Pokemon came out, it was everywhere." And this coincided with an event that came out a year earlier, actually, because in March 1997, Cartoon Network launched their Toonami block, which debuted with 4 major shows. Notably, Cartoon Roulette, Thundercat, Voltron, Real Adventures of Johnny Quest. It would add Robotech in January 2008. January 1998. I can't talk today. Sailor Moon in June 1998. And Dragon Ball Z in August 1998. And this would become a core driver of anime fandom through, even to this day, I'd argue. As Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon were becoming core inflection points for younger fans. And honestly, this is pretty much Dragon Ball Z's success is pretty much solely because of Toonami. Because companies had tried to shop this to networks before. There were test runs in regions across the country where it just did middling or outright flop results. And this was something that was noticed, especially among people who had become thought leaders in our community today. Daryl Surratt stated, and then you start to see a gradual influx of younger fans and a more even split between ladies and gents, which, again, was increasingly a thing due to Sailor Moon or what have you. But, it was really the whole game on television and Cartoon Network, which has really started to shift that demographic. And Lindsay Loveridge, who is the managing editor at ANN, remembered that I used to have to record the shows off of Toonami on a VHS tape because I would get home about 10 minutes into the episode. So I'd watch the last 2/3, then rewind the tape that I set to record to catch the first 10 minutes. But all my friends at the time were into it, the Toonami block especially. Excuse me. So by late 1999, we started to see anime hit the silver screen in North America. In October 1999, Disney released Princess Mononoke uncut under their Miramax imprint, which grossed about $144,000 in its opening weekend. In comparison, as a kind of remark on how much the industry has grown, Suzume, it began, I believe, yesterday, and it's already grossed over $2 million nationwide, which is kind of staggering when you just sit and think about it. Anyway. 2 weeks later, Pokemon the first movie opened, and it became the juggernaut that we all expected to be, grossing $31 million in its opening weekend, more than $85 million in North America overall. It was to that point, no anime film had ever come close to that. That absolutely insane height. A year later, we see Digimon the movie launch, which grossed about $4 million opening weekend, $9 million overall. Thanks, all these figures are through Box Office Mojo. And thanks to the success of these properties, of Pokemon, of Toonami, of Digimon, and all these other works, we start to see broadcast networks start building their own anime lineups. In the 2000s, we had Escaflowne. I am so sorry. And Cyber 6 launching on Fox Kids, Cardcaptor Sakura. I am so sorry. Airing on Kids WDB as Cardcaptors. Adult Swim started airing Cowboy Bebop during their midnight block, becoming the first anime title to air on the block. Wizard Magazine launched Anime Insider, which was meant to be a direct competitor to Anime America, ultimately going on to surpass the publication, becoming the #1 anime and manga magazine in North America. Chad Kime actually commented on that in a podcast with ANN, stating, "We politically did not want our #1 anime magazine in the industry to be Anime America, which was a Viz publication. And there was also the issue of we wanted to broaden the market a bit. So we helped Wizard start Anime Insider by committing to, I think it was $25,000 in ads an issue. And that opened up a whole segment of the market to that Anime America wasn't addressing. 2 years after the launch of Wizard, AD Vision launched New Type USA, which included a combination of original content as well as translated Japanese articles. However, the most important thing in my eye was that New Type gave a platform to a lot of influential voices of of the previous generation and current generation, notably Fred Patton, Guy Poitras, Jonathan Clements, and so on, which helped to really bring the two worlds of the past and the present together. And then there was the introduction of the digital world. By 2001, fan subs groups began maintaining IRC channels, which were pretty much your major hub for acquisition of new content prior to the rise of BitTorrent and trackers. Kazaa launched in March 2001, which introduced users to a new frontier for anime acquisition, and a lot of viruses. I mean, I'm pretty sure we've all had that case where, you download something, it's going to be the new episode of, I don't know, like Haruhi or something of that nature, only to get a video of the Numa Numa dance and the text saying, your computer's wrecked. And honestly, this actually lowered the threshold for the fan subs and in particular anime piracy. And though it wasn't popular initially, just because broadband hadn't reached major penetration at that point, BitTorrent's first public release came out in June 2001. And with the rise of these digital platforms, you start to see a rise in the download of digisubs, to the point that by 2008, more than 6 million anime fan subs would be downloaded every single week. This 6 million figure came from a survey commissioned by Central Park Media's John O'Donnell to the firm Media Defender. But on a more pleasant note, the 2000s also brought us a period where anime would reach its greatest acclaim yet. In the fact that Disney released Spirited Away in 2002. The film was a critical darling and a commercial success, bringing in over $10 million in its overall theatrical release. It won numerous awards in the domestic markets, include 4 Annies and the Utah Film Critics Association Best Picture Award. But the sweetest plum came in 2003 when it won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. I mean, look at Hayao Miyazaki's smile there. He never smiles. And this is the first and only animated film to ever win Best Animated Feature. To quote Dr. Raina Dennison, it signified a major shift in the local market, proving that films from Japan could be the equivalent of, in blockbuster terms, big Hollywood movies. And as you can see from the quote on the slide, Roger Ebert praised the film, calling it a wonderful film, and urging people to go see it despite the reservations. And at this point, the market began to really heat up. By 2003, the market had grown exponentially, with it breaking in an estimated value of $4.3 billion, where 25 to 30 titles would be launched in 2000 per month. June 2003 alone had 80 DVD releases. And behind the scenes, we start to see publishers just start to go, I don't want to say go casino, but they really started to take riskier gambles on titles, just bidding up license fees to try and catch more portions of the market. To quote Chad Kime again, DoD is launching. Pokemon is going nuts. Everyone sees 20% year-over-year growth in sales, if not more. So, flush with cash, Geneon and ADV and Funimation start going, well, if I can get a monopoly on the acquisition side of the market, then these guys won't be making more money and they won't have more titles to sell, and we'll be able to get in front of the other guys. So they started building up on the properties. So when we first bought, say, Trigun, we had 6,000 units break even, and we sold 20, then 30. Then we were like, wow, okay, maybe on the next title we can bid 15. Well, for Vandred, our break even was like 20,000 units, which is outrageous. And they never got there, by the way. And it was around this period, in July 2003, that Japanese ad firm Dentsu announced they acquired Geneon Entertainment Pioneer, which I renamed to Geneon. And it was shortly after this that we started to see the first few cracks in the industry begin to show. By 2004, CPM had discontinued its manga and its manga line, citing financial issues, something that they actually confirmed at Anime Boston, I believe, the next year. In April 2005, Anime America went from being a monthly magazine to a quarterly digest that they just gave out for free at Walden Books and Borders. two stores with very long lifespans, as we all know. In May 2005, Navarre Corporation acquired Funimation for $165 million, despite the company only having net revenues of $29.8 million at the time. And within the year, DVD sales had slowed to a crawl, where we're seeing a 10% year-over-year growth before. We're seeing just 2-3% by 2006. And to quote the New York Times, DVD sales represent more than half of the revenue studios generate from most of their movies. But these sales are expected to grow just 2% this year, a far cry from double-digit growth the industry enjoyed just 2 years ago. High-definition DVDs were supposed to pick up the slack, but the technical delays and the thorny format war between camps, led by Sony and Toshiba, have dampened expectations. And this all built up to what many people can say as the first major sign that something was grossly wrong. Because in December 2005, the Musical and Media Group liquidated all 61 of its Media Play stores. They asked creditors to defer up to half of their debt until 2008. And they were expected to see more than $20 million in losses on $1 billion in sales revenue. And by January 2006, a month later, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and would end up closing another 284 stores, citing increased retail competition and piracy. A month later, they announced that they would close another 226 Sam Goody stores and 115 Sunko stores. I mean, as you can tell now, we are literally hundreds upon hundreds of stores. Considering that Musicland was a major seller of anime merch through Sunko, through Sam Goody, through Media Play, more than 680 retail locations that stocked anime were just gone overnight, shocking the overall industry, especially considering that the company held a lot of unsold inventory, which meant a lot of unsold inventory, which meant a lot of debt that became a lot of returns. And this just kept getting worse because in March 2006, Transworld Entertainment purchased Musicland. They killed another 55 stores. And I mean, to quote Lance Haskell, returns killed companies because partly the company's fault and partly these stores, because these stores would just sit on inventory and never return them. What actually saved Funimation was all that. Partially it was Dragon Ball, but a lot of it was the CEO of Navarre had a strict mandate for Funimation, saying you had to be at 20% returns. So they actually short-checked retailers to ensure they, in the worst-case scenario, which was they wouldn't get a catastrophic return that would just crush the entire organization. And this just kept getting worse because in January 2006, we saw pretty much the death of Saturday morning cartoons. WB Network dropped its weekday cartoon blocks. Central Park Media laid off a lot of its staff, which they acknowledged at Anime Boston in a very awkward panel that I was surprised at. It was really awkward. And a few months later, Sojitz, Japanese firm, announced that they acquired 20% stake in AD Vision. While at the same time, 4Kids announced that they would close their acquisitions unit. And to quote Justin Savakis on this, and we were just looking at some of the stuff from ADV and Genion, and my friends and I would just get together and look at these numbers and just laugh because some of these shows were just moving literal single, double digits. Like, they were just not selling. And we're just like, how is this sustainable? The companies are falling on our faces and this isn't working. So it's kind of a gallows humor because we were all just kind of bracing ourselves for the inevitable. And then when we did get the press release that, ADV got the partial buyout from Sojitz, and then the shutting down, or that Genion was shutting down, and the chaotic way that happened, it was just like, oh shit, it's happening. Oh God. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You just can't look away. It's just not good. Now, I can't say it was all bad because it was around this time that Toonami started playing with digital streaming with the Toonami Jetstream. And this was a free ad-supported streaming platform that carried original programming as well as Toonami favorites. And it was meant to be a joint venture that with Viz Media that would revamp their previous Toonami reactor. And that actually lasted for quite a while, which I'll explain later. As you can tell, I'm just trying to highlight the positive before I go right back into Despairland. Because it was around this year that Yaoi publisher Biblos closed its doors after Hekitensha filed for bankruptcy. And a month later, Biblos was reorganized under the aegis of retailer Anime, who relaunched the company as as Libre Publishing. Now, Central Park Media had a lot of licenses with Biblos, and they continued to publish those as per the contract. Something that Libre would call illegal, as they insist that all licenses terminated with the termination of Biblos as an organization. And they demand that CPM renegotiate every single one of the licenses. And to quote Yaoi Suki, since putting up their notice, John O'Donnell says Libre has not taken any action to settle the matter, and even refuses to sit down with O'Donnell or any other CPM representatives to try and work it out. Libre has not filed a lawsuit, and he hopes that Libre will bring their lawyers to the U.S. so that the matter can be settled, but thinks they are trying to deliberately harm sales of the books until CPM's license expires so they can license the series to another company. And I apologize in advance because we are going to get into some hardcore economics at this point, because I need to explain how some of this stuff works to really get into how bad stuff got. Because in May 2005, we had the first credit default swap from hedge fund manager Michael Burry, who initiated against subprime mortgage bonds with Deutsche Bank with a valuation of $60 million. Now, I should really kind of explain what these are. A subprime mortgage is, in plain English, let's just say I get a mortgage for 8% on house price at about $1 million. Now, that is a rich person's house. I'd never be able to pay that. And heaven forbid, say I was, fired or furloughed or something like that. Then I would just be completely bored. It's set up to fail, and it's subprime because, it's going to the absolute worst recipient, basically. A credit default swap is an arrangement in which the seller of the debt agrees to compensate the buyer in the event that the person to whom the debt was issued defaults. Now, assume I have that $1 million mortgage again, and I can't pay. I default. So, in that case, the person who sold my debt to, say, Bear Stearns, would owe Bear for a percentage of the funds that would have been gained had I paid the debt off. It's a lot of... There's a word I want to say, but I do not want to get in trouble here, so... Let's just say shenanigans is a good one. Because this actually coincided with a trend of steadily and rapidly rising home prices and a growing income inequality in the United States. The housing market had been fueled by these subprime mortgages, which were then sold between organizations to each others in the form of credit default swaps. So this is clearly a sustainable business practice, isn't it? As you can see here, from 2006 to 2007, we start to see a sharp rise in foreclosures in the North American housing market, which led to a financial crisis that spread out to every major market. And it just got worse and worse and worse. By the end of 2006, more than 1.25 million foreclosures were issued. By 2007, more than 25 subprime lenders declared bankruptcy, or they announce massive losses, or they put themselves up for sale to stop the bleeding. And this was only the start of it, because in August 6, 2007, American Home Mortgage, one of the largest mortgage brokers in the country, filed for Chapter 11, which triggered a credit crunch across the world as these subprime mortgage-backed securities, the credit default swaps, were found in banks all over the world, and reality began to set in. And it just kept building, because a month later, on September 30th, 2007, Internet S&L NetBank went bankrupt, becoming the biggest savings and loan failure since the Reagan years. Sorry, since the Bush years. And the efforts to stop the bleeding were just not working, as home prices just went through the floor, and more than 2.2 million foreclosures had been issued in 2008, and unemployment just skyrocketed as commodity prices went down through the floor. Like, by 2010, unemployment rates had peaked at 9.63%. That sounds like a lot. In reality, it was closer to 1 in every 4 people was out of work. This was a catastrophe that had not been seen since the Great Depression. And this obviously had an impact on the anime market, as companies just tightened their belts and tried to weather the storm. Anime really started to, get hurt. On September 11th, 2007, Geneon USA laid off its entire marketing sales team. About a little more than 2 weeks later, they just stopped all sales and marketing of its products and stopped accepting returns, because they had originally intended to work with ADV Films to handle all the distribution. And about them, I mean, they have their own story, which I'll get into. In 2009, CPM filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They had more than 1.2 million in debt and had to liquidate every single one of their licenses. I mean, if you go to A&N, there's a list of everything they had that went to every single corner of the market, from Utena to Slayers to MD Geist and Prodeko. By May 4, 2009, the Association of Japanese Animation's managing director Yasuo Yamaguchi described the industry as a bubble that several years ago that burst. And the pain just kept piling on, because as this was unfolding, the Cartoon Network announced at Anime Network Atlanta that they literally canceled Toonami due to low ratings. Like, they canceled it that day. They announced it like a few hours later. They aired the final Tom broadcast of the night, which was still heartbreaking to this day. And while the Toonami Jetstream would live for another half year or so, they ripped that Toonami name right off. It was just the Cartoon Network Jetstream. Because at the time, at the panel, Adult Swim rep stated that Cartoon Network rep stated that an anime program would move to Adult Swim, which is deemed by Cartoon Network to be the new main source for anime. And it just kept going. Remember how I said ADV had a deal that fell through? About that. In April 2008, ADV filed a suit against their investor, Arm Corporation, alleging a breach of contract and fiduciary duty. A year later, ADV announced that they would liquidate all their assets, transfer them to 4 different companies: Seraphim Studios, Acer Holdings, Valkyrie Media Partners, and Section 23 LLC. To the point that the press release that a statement released by former ADV, now Section 23 Representative Mike Bayless stated, Section 23 has acquired all of ADV's former licenses and most of the staff, including everyone at ADV that mattered. And Adam Sheehan actually commented on this, stating, ADV is now out of business. ADV did remaster itself, as you might call it, and change itself into multiple different companies, Section 23, etc., holding different parts of its brands of its marketing, so it's still around. The best way I would describe it is to think of it as Voltron, if it's turned back into the 5 lions, so it's not the one Voltron robot anymore. So the ADV logo is no longer around, but the lions and all the properties are still around. And Anime News Network's Christoph McDonald added, also commented, saying, so really what was announced today? Well, the details will come out in the next few days. It's pretty obvious that it's not much more than a corporate restructuring that moves intellectual assets away from a dysfunctional corporate entity that has credit problems and hostile shareholders. And this saga actually kept going well into the 2010s, because in 2011, Funimation sued AD Vision, which was basically just a zombie organization at that time, claiming that ARM transferred its right to enforce contracts with ADV, including all outstanding debts. The case was ultimately dismissed about 3 years later, with no clear resolution. There was a resolution, I just don't remember off the top of my head. And I had to break Genion off into its own slide because it was such a wild explanation. Because as we know, Dentsu announced that they acquired Pioneer, renamed it to Genion. And August 2007, retail received words that ADV Films would handle all marketing for them. About a month later, A&M reported the distribution deal was dead. And then a week later, Genion ceased all sales and distribution of home video products and canceled outstanding orders. And there is a lot to unpack. Because Chad Kime elaborated on the situation, stating, there was a flip in profitability, and there was a huge delay in being able to recognize it. Let's go back the clock to say 2003. DVD's launching, Pokemon is going nuts. Everyone sees 20% year-over-year growth in sales. We can kind of go into that. So they started bidding on these enormous sums of money. And at the same time, we're bidding on properties that we don't know when the exact street date is because they're still in production. Hikai J, for example. At that time, also, when Pioneer was purchased by Genion, after the deal was finalized in 2005, Kime noted that 7 figures of cash were turned over to Funimation as part of the deal. So every cent of the money that they had earned through Pokemon sales, through Dragon Ball Z DVD sales, that was gone and replaced by that much in debt, plus an interest payment. And a few months later, 20 to 25% of their total sales for the previous year returned to them thanks to the musical aid closing. It was seen as a very rude awakening. A lot was actually kept hidden from the top level because the company's sales manager was incredibly bullish and kept saying the return product would sell through to the customers, the team, to the president, basically lying about what they had bet that bomb that was building up, that fiscal bomb building up in their warehouses. And here we are. To quote Kime, when trying to estimate the value of our inventory, we did an 18-month rolling average. We calculated your average sales, and then that for the last 18 months is your sales in perpetuity. When you walk into a month and you are returned a fifth of everything you sold, and they average it out, why everything's negative? That means that all of your inventory is worthless, and you now have to take a charge in accounting against that asset. So basically, thanks to the music lane closure, thanks to returns, thanks to that the sales manager lied about, thanks to the debt payments, thanks to everything that had built up at the time, their inventory wasn't just worthless, it was less than worthless. Especially when considering the fact that they had to pay for storage, pay for shipping, that they need to write off of their bottom line. And this was all in the figure of 6-figure write-offs at any given time. Combined with the fact the market they had been bidding on for a lot of these titles that they had to bid for really early in the into the market. Suddenly the titles that they bought thinking they'd sell like 20,000 units were selling 10K, 5K, 4K. So a title they bought big on, like the one that they expected to sell 40K, Peak IJ, for example, now estimated at 20K. But they already bought the license for that, and it wouldn't come out for another 2 years. So who knows when that would actually come out and what they would actually be selling. I mean, for crying out loud, Demon Lord Dante, which sold in 3-digit numbers, required 30,000 units to break even. To quote Kaim, your titles are like the Titanic. Your audience has pretty much a good idea of what they're getting, and you can shift a little bit, but if it's got a bad reputation, you can't counter it. And basically nearly every contract they had from 2005 to 2007 was a loser. Cyberbuster sold less than 100 units. Zippong sold poorly. Murako Takahashi Anthology had a minimum 10,000 to break even. They sold less than 100 across all volumes. To quote Kai, we were riding this gigantic glowing star that suddenly became a black hole. And unfortunately, the bad news just kept coming because in 2011, Bandai announced that they closed their online store. In December 2011, they closed their online store. A month later, 4 days, less than a week later, they announced that they would end distribution of all of their new releases, shift their focus to other organizations, with a particular focus on streaming platforms. Ken Iadomi commented on it, stating that the pricing range for our products kept dropping in Western countries, and people tended to only buy sets with very reasonable prices, which we understand is what fans want, but it led us to a different strategy than what the Japanese licensors want. So we always had a problem with licensors wanting something different than what customers wanted. And Robert Napton, who worked with Bandai for many years, backed that up, stating, that was very much a decision made by corporate, not by anyone in America, as Ken said in his interview right after that happened. So I'm not saying anything that hasn't already been publicly stated. But yeah, it's a big company. But it's a lot of small independent satellites that act separately from each other. And that's really something that people never got. The only real reason that we did receive was that the industry had shrunk substantially, and Bandai faced several large returns, which led to the lackluster financial results that we had seen across the rest of the industry. But suddenly, something came through to actually... Something came through to break through that doom and gloom. Like a bright orange meteorite hitting the anime landscape. Because on May 15, 2006, a for-profit streaming service known as Crunchyroll opened its doors as a startup group by a bunch of UC Berkeley grads. Due to lax moderation practices, it quickly became a place where people go for AMVs and, more commonly, as we know, anime piracy. In February 2008, Crunchyroll received a $4.05 million cash infusion from a VC firm, which was heavily criticized by the industry and a myriad of trade publications at the time. By the end of 2008, Crunchyroll had entered a strategic distribution partnership with TV Tokyo, Piero, and Shueisha to acquire the legal streaming rights to Naruto Shippuden. And as this was happening, Funimation issued a comment stating, Funimation has been carefully monitoring the activities of Crunchyroll.com for some time. Since 2006, Funimation has provided several layers of notifying the site's operators of copyright infringement issues in connection with the content that has been made available through its site. To date, Crunchyroll.com has complied with Funimation's demands to remove the applicable content. The battle against unauthorized distribution of anime is a battle that Funimation cannot fight on its own. Without proactive and effective copyright policing and enforcement by those that control anime content, sites like this will continue to gain a reputation as outlets for free anime. If this happens, the entire anime industry will suffer, making the expensive and time-consuming work of producing anime content for the US market impossible. As we said before, we will continue to act in the best interests of our Japanese licensors, and that includes ensuring that our industry as a whole has a commercial future in the US. Bandai issued a similar statement, basically saying, yeah, what Funimation said. And there's a real irony to this, given that Funimation was basically eaten by Crunchyroll, and Bandai no longer exists. But anyway, Crunchyroll itself became a fully legal organization in January 2009, which paved the way for them to become the industry leader that we know about. Well, we know and use today. And I mean, I really can't stress this enough. In 2023, our industry's biggest players are Sony, AMC, Disney, and Netflix. While it's definitely a celebration that anime has definitely come a long way to becoming popular culture, I still don't know how to feel about that. Excuse me. Which leads us to the root causes of the collapse. Unsustainable trends in bidding on titles led to license costs that required steady income to just break even on, let alone profit. Titles were being licensed early and early in the process, so that, to the point that they were still in pre-production, and led acquisitions to become an almost speculative market. And by the peak of the bubble, it was actually impossible to properly pay enough attention to any one property to market them to consumers. As the moment that one title came out, this focus had to shift immediately to the next one, which led to a negatively reinforcing cycle where companies would pay way too much for licenses, which led them to ship too much product and not promote them properly, which led to returns, which led to distributors losing money, so they had put more titles onto market. As returns diminished, thanks to an ever-growing glut, repeated ad infinitum. So it's basically the Katamari of awful. And this was punctuated by the closure of more than 500 anime-centric retailers in 2005, which saw vital sources of revenue just dry up, leading to unprecedented losses and returns, just to the sheer amount of product return. While at the same time, the anime was fighting with unprecedented piracy, with more than 6 million anime episodes being downloaded every single week. That was in the final death blow, the final end to anything, being triggered by the Great Recession, which led to a collapse in demand across the country, across the world, leading retail to shut, leading people to buy less, leading unemployment to skyrocket to the point that 1 in 4 was out of work. It was just the perfect storm of awful. And this is exactly why I find it so freaking fascinating. So anyway, do we have any questions? We have about 5 minutes left.
My God. What a wonderful journey. Well, I mean, to talk about, maybe not to live through it.
Oh, man. Again, I can't offer enough thanks to people who offered comment for the book, because they offered a lot of perspective that I just hadn't considered before, and I really appreciate it.
Let's see. So far, it's mostly people just saying that they love the panel. Somebody's asking if you could tell us more about the book.
Absolutely. This is a project I've been working on since 2019. Actually, I lost my job in the first wave of the lockdowns, and I said, "All right, there's something I always wanted to do. I may as well start it now." So I started writing about looking into the history of the anime bubble, with the original focus being that 1998 to 2008 period. But I kind of realized that to really understand how we got to this point, I had to go earlier. So what started as a 1997 to 2008 became a general history of the anime industry and anime fandom from the earliest days of like the 1970s up to that point. And it's going to be a fairly comprehensive. I'm talking about 500 pages on this thing.
Jesus. I think that's something we really need too, because so much of this stuff that you talked about in your panel, it's like you either were there and lived through it, or it's in like obscure podcasts that aren't necessarily categorized super accurately. So if you don't know they're there, you can't find them. Like, bless their hearts, the Ancast archive is wonderful, but they've all got like silly titles, so it's hard to know like, oh, this is a comprehensive history of anime insider.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't help that a lot of our history is very much an oral one. So there are some periods that just, had I not talked with people like, say, J. Felder Harvey or Daryl Surratt, we would just be lost to time, because especially the 90s were primarily defined by online fandom, where you had, say, GeoCities or something like that, where, I mean, those sites, those places are just gone. Forums are dead. Most forums are dead and buried. GeoCities are long gone, and a lot of that fan energy that came from there is just, it doesn't exist anymore.
Anime on DVD.
Chris Beveridge was, I say it to this day, Chris Beveridge is a treasure and one of the most vital parts of this community. He actually launched the first major anime news site ahead of ANN. And I really hope he sticks around for as long as he can.
I know that you're also doing a magazine archival project.
I am. That's something that I'm going to be working on a bit more in earnest as I get a bit more time. I have full archives of New Type USA and Anime Insider. I'm trying to get them digitized.
Oh, you have everything now. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to do something similar, but I did not have the motivation that you have. I have maybe 3/4 of Anime Insider, but definitely nowhere even close to New Type.
Yeah, the big thing about New Type is that it's such a weird format for the North American market that it's almost impossible to scan on a commercial flatbed. So
yeah,
I'm trying to get like one of those book scanners, but those are not cheap.
Oh my God. I contacted a company that made a desktop sized one, and they wouldn't even tell me the price. They're like, listen, buddy, we know you can't afford it.
If you have to ask.
Yeah. Well, and also it's a bummer because like America, you'd have to destroy essentially to scan it because of the way they bound that book.
Oh yeah, while the initial volumes were saddle stitched, anything after 2000 were perfect bound, and you'd have to cut off that end piece, and it's just, yeah.
I have not to hijack this and make it the magazine panel, I have a weird like limited run Raijin Comics anime magazine that they did. I don't know if you have seen any of that, but I can scan that if you need any of that for your stuff. They're like 20 pages each.
I have one of those. I have the issue 0 where it was a dual cover promo with Fujin. The Raijin Comics section had surprise, Sakura Wars 4 on the cover.
Nice. I might have almost the entire run. I bought them all off eBay shortly before you started buying everything. We were rivals, not unknowing rivals for a while. I am not noticing a ton of questions, so I don't know if you had anything else. You've got about 2 more minutes.
All right. I will say this. If you would like to talk to me about your experience as a fan, I would love to take some time. I'm currently still running up the 1980s, so I have a bit of ways to go, and I would love to get as many of these stories commit to paper as I can. Otherwise, if you have any rare anime media, do what you can to get them into the Internet Archive, because the more people that can enjoy them, the more people can reference them, the richer our community gets.
Oh yeah. Something that I had never thought about until recently, like Anime Con guidebooks. Like if you weren't there, you didn't read it. But I see the most important question, Sakura Wars best girl.
Sakura Shinguji.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'm really happy to have gotten to see this. I don't want to play favorites, but this is the panel I was looking the most forward to.
Why, thank you. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Hope you had a great time.
Well, I have to remember how to exit out of Zoom. There we go. Thank you. You have a great rest of your day. Cheers.
You too. I'll be back in the chat in like 2 minutes.